contradiction with the evidence science has to offer? Is science the only way to discover the ultimate truth? Do these rational questions seem familiar? Then today's talk will intrigue you.
We will begin proceeding with the recitation of Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Subhanallah. Now introducing my honorable guest.
Subboor Ahmad is a public speaker, debater, and writer. He focuses on giving dawah to atheists. He has also traveled extensively across the globe teaching Muslims how to articulate Islam to non-Muslims. He has a specialty in Darwin's theory of evolution and has debated many prominent atheists over the years, including professors and also internet personalities on the topic of science, God's existence, and Darwinism. He has a master's degree from Birkbeck College, London.
Now, I would finally like to invite Mr. Subboor Ahmad on the stage for the talk.
Assalamu alaikum. Could I make a small request from you guys? You guys look like a very cheerful bunch of people who are going to agree with me. Is that okay? Could the people at the back come to the front? That would be a lot more easier to accept the talk to you. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Firstly, assalamu alaikum. I heard Karachi people have more energy. Assalamu alaikum. Good, fantastic. I've been on a bit of a tour of Pakistan. It's going from like north to south, and I've seen a lot of energy here in Karachi, so I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me to your institute, your university. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever doesn't thank the people does not thank Allah. So I'd like to thank the faculty here for facilitating this talk. So let me just start off on something I think which is important. So there's a boy that comes up to his dad, and he says to him, "Dad, where did we come from? What was our beginning? What was our genesis?" And the dad says, "We came from our parents. You know, grandpa, grandmother, that's where we came from." And the son goes, where did they come from? Well, they came from their parents, their parents. Baba, where did they come from? They came from their parents as well, their parents. Yes, Baba, I'm confused. Because Mama was saying that we started off as primordial soup, and from these low beginnings we evolved into these primates with claws and hair, and we were climbing trees, and when we were climbing trees then we came down to the ground, and we have all these different hominid species like Neanderthals and Denisovans and Homo naledi, and these creatures, these hairy creatures became bipedal and started walking, and then slowly changed into us. So Baba, that's what she said to me. That's very different to what you're saying. And the father goes, Beta, वो अपने खानदान की बात कर रही है, मैं अपने खानदान. So he's talking about his family, I'm talking about mine. And these are two different things. How is this related to the philosophy of science? This is related to the philosophy of science because science is seen, like the Bible verse, as the way, the life, and the truth. Right? So science is seen as something which gives you concrete truths, is the main root of knowledge. And if somebody puts forward a particular idea, whether in chemistry, biology, physics, mathematics, anthropology, linguistics, psychology, whatever, and they're trying to challenge the belief in God or the belief in some religious idea, we can tackle that, whatever idea that it is, based upon the philosophy of science. Raise your hands if you're familiar with the field of philosophy of science, before I get into it. Raise your hands if you sort of heard of it. One, fantastic. Just a quick introduction. How would you describe philosophy of science? What do you think it is?
The way of understanding that this creature especially first, how it was created, and we especially as a human, how we are created, and what is the main goal of a human in this world.
So, philosophy of science, Jazakallah khair for that, philosophy of science, it's like a meta level on science. It's like another level on science. So if you imagine I'm a scientist and I'm trying to do some science, right? Do some observations, do some experiments, right? And I'm studying bacteria, right? I'm studying bacteria. Bacteria is my target, right? I'm trying to understand where do bacteria come from, how do they mutate and stuff. The philosopher of science, he's standing behind the scientist, and he's looking at the scientist and seeing how does the scientist come to conclusions. So in Islamic jurisprudence we have fiqh, so we have Hanafi, Shafi, Maliki, Hanbali, right? We have fiqh. And we have usul of fiqh. We have a fiqh which says, right, when you are traveling you can join prayers. But then you have an usul of fiqh, which is how did that ruling come around? Everyone familiar with this example? You have Islamic law and you have the foundation of law. Philosophy of science is like usul of fiqh. It's a level above, right? It defines the parameters that science works with, right? And what it can actually give you in terms of knowledge. So there's a view in the world today which is that science is the main root of knowledge. That's the first root, that's the first idea in the world. And the second is that science is something which gives you certainty. It's something which is going to give you yaqeen, certainty. This view, which I just mentioned, that science is the main root of knowledge, and that science is going to give you certainty, this is actually pseudoscience. This is not science. This is something known as scientism. Okay? Scientism. Muslims do not have any problem, any issue with science. We don't have an issue. We have an issue with scientism. Scientism is the view that science is the main root of knowledge, and science is going to give you certainty. This is an irrational position to hold. And the whole point of this particular talk is, this talk has two different parts. So today I'm going to cover one part, and then when I come back again to Karachi, inshallah, in January, again, we'll do the second part. So the first session today, what we're going to cover is that the first shahada, if you like, of scientism, the first testimony of scientism, is that science is the main root of knowledge. It's the main way you arrive at knowledge. And what we're saying is that that's a false testimony. That's a false inference, right? So science is not the way, the life, the truth. This is a misunderstanding of science. Science is not there to give you truth. Science is there to give you workable models about the world which can change. It's not there to give you absolute knowledge. So, there's three main ideas of, okay, quick question. Are these scientific ideas, or are these the ideas of scientism? They can't really hear you. Science is the only root of knowledge. Science leads to atheism. Science leads to certainty. Is this science or is this scientism? Scientism. Okay, good. I want you to understand something. Scientism is not actually a term I just coined, right? This is the philosophical term to describe people who hold on to these types of views. Western philosophers have critiqued this view of scientism, right? Because this particular view, even though some atheist philosophers hold on to it, it is incoherent. It is incoherent. Philosophically, and that's my field, this idea is dead, philosophically. Very few people are willing to defend it, philosophically. However, from a popular culture, through movies, internet, social media, popular science writers, this view is very popular, right? So the popular view in the Western world, which gets infused into the Islamic world through movies and through social media, this view of scientism is academically wrong. Academically, this view is wrong. But in a popular culture, this view is correct, right? So we're going to be covering this view being incorrect in terms of science is the only root of knowledge. Science leading to atheism and science leading to certainty, we will cover inshallah in January, the second session. So today we're only going to cover science being the only root of knowledge. Okay? Now for me to do this, I actually need your participation. Okay? If you guys don't participate, it's going to be very difficult to carry on. So we're going to do this. We're going to do a series of exercises. What do you feel when you look at that image of that child? What emotions do you feel? To help? Yeah. What else? What other emotions do you feel? Do you feel sad? Sad, yeah. What else? What do you feel when you look at an image like this? Do you feel like you should help? Yes. Raise your hands if you think you should help. Fantastic. So we have these moral feelings of empathy, sympathy, altruism, compassion, mercy, sadness when we look at this. What's interesting is that morality is the driving force of human behavior. Let me repeat that. Morality is the driving force of human behavior. Let me give you an example. In the world today, we are given this false idea that it's information or it's analytical, philosophical concepts which drive human behavior, but they don't. or rationality drives human behavior. It doesn't. In fact, morality drives human behavior. So let's look at some revolutions. Communist revolution in the former Soviet Union, Russia. French Revolution, the partition of Pakistan and India. Were these based upon dry, abstract philosophical concepts, or were these moral movements? These were moral. These were based on justice, on the idea of right and wrong and truth and these things, right? Now somebody says science is the only route of knowledge, which is what we're covering today. Science can tell you absolutely nothing about this image. It can tell you that this is a child. It can tell you this child is hungry. It can tell you the chemical composition of the food that the child's holding. It can tell you that, breaking this down, you have particles. It cannot tell you whether it's right or wrong to help that child. Science has nothing to say about this moral issue. So, a few years ago, when I was working in High Wycombe, which is a town outside of London, I used to go to an internet cafe, a gaming cafe, where you could play video games and use the internet. And there was an atheist who used to work there, and I said to him one day, in my conversation, because I used to talk to him regularly, I said, "Do you believe in God?" And he looked at me with the most religious looking face you can imagine. And he said, "I believe in science." Meaning he saw science as a type of religion, as a type of system. However, science cannot account for morality. And morality is the driving force of human behavior. Okay, quick thought experiment. There's a child like this, who's on the ground, who's poor, and who's asking for help. And somebody goes up to the child, say the sister, she goes up to the child, hugs the child, gives the child food. Is that a good thing, yes or no? Yes. Okay. You have the child on this end, and that child is poor and hungry like this, and somebody, instead of helping the child, they go up to the child and they kick the child. And they start kicking the child. Is that wrong? Yes. Are you sure about this? I'm not sure if you didn't give much of a response. Are you sure this is right and this is wrong? Yes. Science can only tell you this is a rearrangement of particles and this is a rearrangement of particles. That's all they can tell you. That sister going and hugging and feeding the child is a rearrangement of particles. And this person, this cruel, evil person kicking the child, this is a rearrangement of particles. So the next time someone says to you, "I only believe in science," give them this example. Because this is usually the example I use when I debate atheists, right? I say to them, "Right, you got your fancy little religion, right? Fantastic, explain this to me." And this is quite embarrassing because they cannot actually explain this. And we're going to cover, inshallah, because I'm here for about 10 months in Pakistan, we're going to cover different modules, and one of the modules we're going to cover later on, inshallah, is Darwinian evolution. From even a Darwinian point of view, morality doesn't exist. Morality, from a Darwinian point of view, is an illusion created by our genes to help us survive. It doesn't actually exist. From the Islamic point of view, morality is as real as this table for Islam. But from a scientism point of view, it's a social construct. It's something that people just made up. Okay. How many people here believe Genghis Khan existed as a real person? That's not a picture of him, by the way. Raise your hands if you believe Genghis Khan existed. Okay. Raise your hands if you're sure that he did exist. Alright. Prove to me that Genghis Khan, or Plato, or Aristotle, or Napoleon, or any historical figure ever existed using the scientific method? Let's try it. Come on, guys. Let's try it. Let's try it. Huh?
You just have to learn the history.
That's good, Zuhair Bhai. But that's the history. History is known as testimonial knowledge, based upon testimony of people. For example, in Islam, we have an isnad system. Right? This person said to this. That's not science. That's testimonial knowledge. Someone could say, maybe we can do a DNA test. Okay? Is that science, a DNA test?
Yes.
Good. So, can anyone tell me where he's buried? Anyone have a guess? Where is Genghis Khan buried? Have a guess of all the countries in the world. It's not going to be Mexico. I'll tell you that now. It's not going to be Mexico. Huh?
Mongolia?
Mongolia. Very good. Where in Mongolia?
Near to China.
That's where Mongolia is, but where is he buried? Where's Genghis Khan buried? So we agreed it's not Sialkot, we agreed it's China, right? Fantastic. No, say Mongolia. However, no one knows where he's buried because one of his last wishes was for him to be buried in a hidden place. So no one knows where he's buried. No one knows. Even if we could do a DNA analysis, how would we know that grave that's in front of us, that's the DNA of Genghis Khan? We wouldn't know. If it says on his grave, Genghis Khan, how do we know that somebody didn't make that up? What I want you to understand is that there is a source of knowledge known as testimony. Testimonial knowledge. That source of knowledge, which is known as testimonial knowledge, it is not scientific. It's known as testimonial knowledge. And 99% of the beliefs that a normal human being has in their head, which are rational, 99% are testimonial, not scientific knowledge. Even, okay, how many people here believe in physics there's a theory known as Big Bang? Raise your hands if you believe that theory. Now, let me ask that question again. Raise your hands if you believe, if you pick up a science textbook, there's a theory known as Big Bang, and that's a theory in physics. Okay, good. So, it says I believe in the Big Bang, I read it in a science book. Is that testimonial knowledge or is that scientific knowledge? Is it really? Think about it. Did they do the tests to discover the Big Bang themselves using a telescope? Or did they read it in a book? You read it in a book. So even scientific knowledge that you learn from other people is testimonial. The only scientific knowledge which is known through science is what the scientist does themselves. The average person who reads it in a science book, that knowledge is actually testimonial knowledge. It's not scientific knowledge. So testimony accounts for 99% or more of your beliefs which are rational. So if someone says, I only believe in science, you can tell them, well, throw away history, throw away geography, throw away even scientific knowledge. Okay, another question. It's not a trick question, by the way. Do you have a great, 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 great grandfather? Raise your hands if you do. Why are some people not putting up their hands? Well, what's going on? I'm pretty sure that this isn't like a trick, right? Some people aren't sure. Like they just came into existence in some quantum entanglement, right? So I think we're... Okay, let's start with Zuhair, right? Are you sure?
Yes.
You sure? Okay. So, how can you show me that using science? How can you show me you have a 7 generations going back grandfather based upon science?
It's just because if I exist, then he must have existed.
Say it again.
The main reason is, as I exist today, so that is one of the main reasons why he must have existed.
Excellent. So what Zuhair did there is that he used deductive logic. Even though he didn't call it deductive logic, that's what he was using. So if he exists, then he had parents. They had parents. They had parents, they had parents going back 7 generations. That's all it is. This is known as deductive logic. Deductive logic is not scientific, it's deductive logic. Science, it is dependent upon logic. But logic is not science. Logic is something you need before you do science. Is that clear with everybody? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Okay. Raise your hands if this country, Micronesia, you believe it does exist. Okay, Google it. Someone Google it. Does it exist? Go on your phone. I know some of you are already playing Angry Birds on your phone. It doesn't matter. Just open up another tab and check out. Micronesia, does it exist? Let's have some confirmation. Okay, raise your hands if you think it exists. You Googled it, you know it's real. Alright, 1 guy, 2 guy, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Fantastic. Well, technically there's no democracy in Islam, but anyway, just doing a head count. How many people here believe that it does exist? You're certain it does exist. You Googled it, you know it exists. Good. So, give me scientific evidence that Micronesia does exist. Have you seen pictures? Okay. Put in Micronesia and put in images. I think this is the first time that students are like getting permission to use their phone. That's why they're like in disbelief. I'm allowed to use my phones? Okay, anyone who can see images of Micronesia?
Yes.
Okay, my friend, what's your name? Muhammad Umar. Alright, Muhammad Umar. Have you seen images of Micronesia? So you know it's a real country?
Yes.
Okay. Is that scientific knowledge? Well, it's pictures. Is pictures scientific knowledge or testimonial knowledge? I think there's a bit of ikhtilaf. I like ikhtilaf. What's going on? Is it scientific knowledge or is it testimonial? But isn't that a picture where you can see? Isn't that scientific knowledge? See, that people are confused, and that's my aim, to get you guys confused. Alright, let's have a vote again.
Seeing is believing.
How many people, seeing is believing, eh? How many people, you've seen the pictures of Micronesia now, how many people believe that that's scientific knowledge? 1, okay, good. 2, 3, good. How many people believe that that is testimonial knowledge? How many people are confused? You're confused. Well, if you're confused, that's good. That's going to help you in your married life. So, you should always be, one of the advice that I got before I got married is, don't take your wife seriously and do take her seriously. Actually, I got that advice from Hamza Source. That was a good piece of advice. So, it should work both ways. I'm not saying it's asymmetrical. So, this is a confusing thing. You've seen a picture of Micronesia, right? But you've never been there. Is that scientific knowledge or is that testimonial knowledge? Technically, that is not scientific knowledge. Why? Because you're not inside Micronesia. Google and Google Images and the vloggers and all the people online who are making videos about Micronesia, you are accepting the existence of Micronesia based upon their testimony. So it's actually testimonial knowledge. Right? Confused brother, still confused, but doesn't matter. Okay. Solve this equation. You guys study engineering?
Yes.
Which types of engineering? Civil, electrical, aeronautical? No? For everyone that's studying engineering, I'm sorry to hear that, because I did the same in long time ago, and it's very difficult, and I don't want anything to do with Reynolds numbers and all that stuff. I've had enough of it. But still, you guys have to do a lot of mathematics, right? It's a very tough discipline. engineering?
Yes.
Are you guys trying to solve this? You jumped the gun. You're supposed to solve this, not using hot maths. I want you to solve this using science. No, you're solving it using maths. I'm asking you to solve it using science.
Math is also a branch of science.
Oh, good. So someone said maths is a branch of science. Okay, how many people believe that science is dependent upon maths, and how many people believe that maths is a science? Okay, how many people believe that science depends upon mathematics? Ooh, good. How many people believe mathematics is just basically science? One person. What's your name? Asad. Okay. So Asad is the only one who put up his hand. Okay, let's ask him. So, why do you think mathematics is science? Did I put you on the spot? Why do you think science is mathematics?
I just think that maths is science.
Okay, but why do you believe that? What evidence do you have for that?
No, really no.
Okay, that's fine. No problem. Okay. Science is defined as observation and reasoning upon data to come up with hypotheses, theories, test them, stuff like that, right? So science you can roughly put as hypothesis, testing, observation, falsification, and all that type of stuff. Does that stuff require observation? Yes or no? Requires observation. Do you need observation to solve this mathematical equation? Yes or no?
Yes.
Really? What observation? Do you need to get 9 objects and then put 3 objects and then divide by a third object and then add 1? Or are you just going to solve it using maths? Okay, let's get down to another question. Even easier. 1 plus 1 is 2. That basic thing that we learned in school. 1 plus 1 is 2. This is a deeply philosophical question. Is that based upon observation or is that based upon definition? Both. So Zahib is again confused. Neither here nor there, right? So let me ask Zahib a question. He said both. Okay, so I start off in this world and I have a blank slate, right? I don't know any knowledge, supposedly. That's not the way it works, but hypothetically. Then I take an object 1, object 2, and then I realize 1 plus 1 is 2. And then I get a banana, another banana, and then I count 1, 1, 2. Do I need observation to prove that if I take one object and another object, I will get 2 objects? Do I need observation? Or do I know that because of causality, because of a priori knowledge, that 1 plus 1 is 2? Do I know that before observation, or do I need observation to know 1 plus 1 is 2?
Initial observation process and then based on further knowledge.
See? Interestingly, and this is quite interesting, philosophically, the definition of 2 is 1 plus 1. That's the definition of 2. You're not going to one day do a science experiment where you take 2 objects and the answer is 5. You'll always, if you take one object and another object, you'll always end up with 2. You'll never end up with 5. So, according to philosophers, and Bertrand Russell and others, they did great work on this, mathematics is not based upon observation. Mathematics is based on definitions and axioms and a priori principles. It's not based on observation. It's not based on this. Okay, good. So now let's do a bit of logic, right? if all A are B, actually forget this. This is quite boring. Zohaib is a human. That's my first premise. Pretty much looks like a human, right? That's fine. Zohaib is a human. All human beings are mortal. That's my second premise. All human beings are mortal, meaning they have an end. Zohaib is a human. All humans are mortal. What's the conclusion? Zohaib is mortal. Fantastic. This is the standard structure of an argument. You have a premise, and a conclusion. And the premises, they lead to the conclusion. Right? And if it's a valid and sound argument, it necessarily leads to the conclusion. If all humans are mortal, and Zohaib is a human, which is questionable, then the conclusion is Zohaib is mortal. This is a logical deduction. This is something which we know. Does science tell us that, or does logic tell us that? Logic tells us that. Logic tells us if you have a conclusion, if you have a premise, and a conclusion, the premises lead to the conclusions. Right? And there's many different types of logic, inductive, deductive, fuzzy, and there's all these different types. The main thing is, these are not scientific. These are based upon reason. Okay, this definitely doesn't happen after the first 2 days of marriage. But you get a cake, right? Say your wife makes you a cake, and it says, I love you, right? Or you guys aren't married, and that's not really going to happen when you get married anyway. So let's just say that's your mum, to make it more realistic. That's your mum who made that cake. Yeah? She made a cake saying, I love you. Now, that particular cake is in front of you, and you can see it. You can do a chemical analysis of it, of its composition, what temperature is baked at, the nutritional content of the cake, right? Can that mechanical information tell you why your mother made the cake? Yes or no? No. What if you do a lot more information, a lot more discussion, and you do a lot more scientific analysis? Will you ever get to, from how the cake is made to why the cake is made? Can you go from how to the why? Can you? Yes or no?
No.
Impossible. You cannot. Science doesn't answer the questions of why. Science can only attempt to explain how the world supposedly works. How and why are two different things. This is very important. I'm going to give you a bit of a historical background to this. Who was the first scientist? Historically, who was the first scientist? Anyone know? Sorry? No, what we would call the modern scientific method. Right? Who was the first scientist? How do we know? Sorry? Ibn Sina? Anybody else? Jabir bin Hayyan. You know, when I usually do this in London or somewhere else, right, I always hear Galileo, Kepler, Anaximander, whatever, right? So I'm glad at least we've got some Asian names, not Asian names, but, you know, Middle Eastern names here, yeah? But the perception in the world usually is Galileo, Kepler, or Francis Bacon, or whatever. It's actually Hassan bin Haytham. Hassan bin Haytham is classified as the first scientist. Hassan bin Haytham lived about 1,000 years ago, about 500 years before Galileo. Hassan bin Haytham, the reason why he's considered the first scientist is not because he's the first one to try and do science, because the Greeks tried to do science. They tried to do proto-science before. It's because he put forward a method of science. Testing, observation, falsification, peer review, right? And that method we still use to today. That's why he's considered the first scientist. Because he put forward the actual method of science. There's a book written by a historian by the name of Bradley Stevens. And Bradley Stevens actually explains in his book, and the book is actually called The First Scientist. He explains Hassan ibn Haytham is the first scientist because he devised the scientific method and he also did science. Okay. Now, why this is important is this. Hassan ibn Haytham believed science should be done because it brings you closer to God. Science should be done because it brings you closer to God. And he said, I do science so that I may become closer to God. Okay? The how for him did not impact the why. Okay, quick question. I have this microphone in front of me. Electricity is flowing through it. You have wires, you have copper, you have metal, you have a bit of plastic, you have a plug to the socket. You have all of this mechanical explanation of how this microphone works. What if I gave you an hour lecture about how this microphone works, and then I said to you, nobody made this microphone. So I explain to you how the microphone works, and then I say to you, nobody made the microphone. Do the two things go together?
No.
Yes or no?
No.
No. Why? Why don't they go together?
There should be a creator.
Yeah, there should be a creator, but why is my logic incoherent? Why is my logic irrational?
Because we are seeing the object in front of us, so that it has been made by somebody.
Yes, so we cannot go from, hey, look at this, how it works, to, it doesn't have a creator. It doesn't, yes, it has a design. And more importantly, it's because how something's made doesn't explain away why it was made or who made it. So the how and the why is two different things. Quick thought experiment. Does science in biology, physics, chemistry, anthropology, social sciences, does it mention God as part of the explanation? Yes or no? No, 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 no. It doesn't. In fact, science today is seen as anti-theistic, anti-God. Let me give you a bit of an interesting historical background to this. Hassan ibn Haytham came up with the scientific method, and then he developed the scientific method, and then he continued the scientific method. And the science in the world, the how and why distinction, this continued on, and they mentioned God. The early Muslim scientists, they mentioned God. The Christian scientists who took over after the Renaissance, during the Renaissance rather, they mentioned God in everything, even in mathematics, even though it's not science, they mentioned God, in physics and chemistry and everything. They explained how, but they also said why. They also said God made it. They explained how it worked, but they also explained that God did it. And we get this clear distinction in Surah Mulk. Allah says, do you not see the birds in the sky? And what's the next word? What's the next thing Allah says? Do you not see the birds up in the sky? How they fly? What does Allah say? They spread their wings and they fold them in. So Allah is giving you a mechanical explanation. Allah is giving you a mechanical explanation of how the birds fly. But then Allah says, none holds them up except Allah. That's the why, this is the how. How and why don't conflict. How and why, historically, for the last 1,000 years, 85% of the historical record in terms of the science, the how-why distinction was clear. It was very clear that how and why are two different things, and why and how do not conflict. God as an explanation, the why explanation, was not divorced from science until the late Victorian era. The late Victorian era. This is a very important historical thing to mention. From the late Victorian time, the why and the how distinction was no longer acknowledged, and science by a rule which is known as methodological naturalism, which we're going to cover in next session as well. Methodological naturalism, the rule said you're not allowed to mention God in any of the sciences. This rule was introduced in the late Victorian, right? Methodological naturalism. Methodological naturalism is why today in biology, chemistry and physics, God is not mentioned. Not because those sciences show there's no God, it's because that is the rule that was set in the late Victorian times. Now imagine I walk through this door and I'm about to start the lecture, and then I say to everybody, right, everybody who's wearing something red, you have to throw it out, and anything red in this room we have to get rid of. Anything red. So our brother's wearing something red, this sign is red, the sister's got a red scarf on, right? Anything red, we go outside of the room and we throw it. Then everybody comes back in. Is there going to be any red left in the room? Yes or no? Now, when I'm about to start the lecture, I say, red does not exist. Red as a color does not exist. Not in this room, but in reality, there's no such thing as red. Is that a logical conclusion? Why? No, why is it illogical for me to set the rule, the assumption that nobody's allowed to walk in this room with red colors, and then make the false inference that red does not exist? What's the problem with this logic?
If you are not able to observe something, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Excellent, excellent. Just because you can observe something does not mean it doesn't exist. Also, I'm the one who set the rule saying you're not allowed to wear red in this room. When you walk into a science lab, library, research facility, the rule on the door says methodological naturalism. You are not allowed to mention God. From the late Victorian times. Therefore, when you are in the scientific field and you're doing science, that's why God is not mentioned. And those people who do mention God, they are expelled from the scientific enterprise. And that has historically happened, and in the next session I'll give examples of that, inshallah. So, it's not a conclusion of science that there's no God. It is an assumption from the late Victorian times, and that assumption has been mistaken to be a conclusion. Just like red is not allowed in this room, you cannot say therefore there's no red color. That rule was introduced in the late Victorian times. So, how and why do not conflict with each other. Okay. Metaphysics, right? Is the world real? Do other minds exist? Is the past real? These are metaphysical questions. These are not scientific questions. Why do I exist? Again, that's an existential question, not a scientific question. By definition, metaphysics is outside of the domain of science. Okay, here's the last slide before we go to Q&A. The idea in the world that science is the only route of knowledge. That is a testimony of scientism, the people who subscribe to scientism. That's not science, that's scientism. We know this to be false because the driving force of human behavior, morality, and the existence of right and wrong, which any sane person would agree with, although some people today say it doesn't exist, that cannot be shown through science. Science cannot answer the why question. Science cannot answer metaphysical questions. Science cannot prove mathematical or logical concepts. It has to precede them. It cannot tell us about testimonial truths. Science cannot tell us about that. 99% of our beliefs are not scientific. Now there's a problem, and the problem is science is seen as rationality, and they're seen as the same thing, when they're not. Rationality, if you like, is a large domain and a subdomain. Shall I bring in vector spaces, or do you get it? You get it, yeah? So we don't need vector space examples, but we get a domain and a subdomain. Science is a subdomain of rationality. It is not rationality. So when you are told, not you guys, but when people are told 99% of your beliefs are not scientific, they think that means irrational. No, it doesn't. It just means those beliefs are rational, but they're not outside, they're not inside the scientific enterprise. 99, if you take any human being, and I've tested this out in many different places where I've given lectures, you take any human being and you ask them to tell all of your rational beliefs. You believe the world is real, you believe Japan exists, you put down all the beliefs. 99% of them are not scientific. They're not scientific beliefs. They are rational, but they're not scientific. Ultimately, this is very important, if somebody says science is the only root of knowledge, if someone says science is the only root of knowledge, is that statement a scientific statement? Yes or no? Anyone? No? Anyone think it is a scientific statement? Can you put that statement in a test tube? Can you do an experiment on that? No. That is a metaphysical claim. No, sorry, that is a claim in epistemology. Right? That's a claim in epistemology. That's a claim in knowledge. That's not a scientific claim. So ultimately, when someone says science is the only root of knowledge, that statement is self-refuting. Because the statement, science is the only root of knowledge, is not a scientific statement. It's like me saying, this sentence which I'm speaking right now is no more than 2 words. This sentence that I am speaking right now is no more than 2 words. What's wrong with my sentence? My sentence is about maybe 10 words. So this is self-contradiction. This is the very crux of scientism. Scientism is like a stool, right? It's got 3 legs. One leg is science is the only root of knowledge. One leg is science leads to atheism. One leg is science leads to certainty. Today, we've only broken one of the legs, right? And that leg is science is the only root of knowledge. And in the other sessions which we'll do, we'll cover the other mistakes of scientism. So everything good I've said is from Allah. Every mistake is from myself. Jazakallah khair for listening. And we'll start the Q&A inshallah. So, the way I usually do Q&A is any questions, no issues. If you agree with the content, don't disagree with the comment, and just generally have some comments. I'm happy to hear them, inshallah. So you raise your hand and just ask them. Is the brother over there?
Everything in this universe has a reason to exist. So why did God create atheism? What's the reason of atheism? Why did God create atheism?
Very good question. Allah says in the Quran, and this is a really deep verse which I usually use against atheists when I debate them. Allah says in the Quran, the truth is from your Lord. Whoever wants to believe, believe. Whoever wants to disbelieve, disbelieve. Atheism, even according to anthropology, is not a default position. Atheism, according to even evolutionary psychologists, is an acquired position. It's not the default position. The default position, according to our worldview of Islam, is the fitrah, right? That we recognize there is a creator. But even from a secular perspective, the default position, you know, if you reset your Windows or whatever, right? The default operating system, even from a sociological perspective or from a evolutionary psychology perspective, is theism. That's the default position. So Allah allows us to choose whether we want to be believers or we want to be disbelievers. Allah says on the day of judgment, or before even the day comes, that He can show us signs in which there will be no dispute about atheism and theism. theism and atheism. No one could, on the day of judgment, no one could theoretically be an atheist. No one could. Because you're seeing the reality of the unseen. In this world, Allah gives you clear-cut signs for anybody who is sincere, and Allah gives you room that if you want to disbelieve, Allah will misguide you. So this world, we have the choice. In the hereafter, there is no choice because you can see everything. Right? In this world, Allah says you have a fitrah, which turns to Allah in times of distress, through spiritual experiences and stuff. And the fitrah is awoken through reason, through rationality, through revelation, through life experiences, through intuition. And the natural position is to recognize the Creator. Now, if someone decides, I am now not going to be a believer, then Allah says, there's consequences, but that's your choice. Yeah? So Allah says in the Quran that He prefers belief for His servants, meaning it is the preference of Allah that all of humanity believe. But Allah also says He doesn't compel anybody. He gives them the free choice. Okay? Any other questions? In the back.
Assalamu alaikum.
Oh, sorry.
As far as your talk is concerned, I feel that the real concept of the science has been destroyed. So we should learn science or not?
So look, Imam al-Ghazali, he existed a very long time ago, but he said something very profound. Let me just do a quick check with you guys. What is Fard al-Kafaya? Anyone tell me what is Fard al-Kafaya in Islam, in Sharia? What does it mean? ठीक है, मगर उसकी what's the weight of it? Obligatory. It's an obligation. Okay. Let me give you some examples of Fard al-Kafaya. Taking care of widows, taking care of orphans, funerals, right? It is something which if the ummah does not fulfill, then that ummah will be judged by Allah and that ummah is in trouble. Imam al-Ghazali said, science, medicine, knowledge such as this, even mathematics, this is according to him, Fard al-Kafaya. Why did he say this? He said this because he said these are beneficial things. These are things which change the world. These are things which are helpful to humanity. He complained that in the Ummah, there were a lot of people studying fiqh and aqidah, and there was a lack of people studying this science. So and by the way, for Islam, for Muslims, we never made a distinction between secular knowledge and religious knowledge. The ancient madrasas, right, in the Indian subcontinent, which still, interestingly, you get in Egypt and you get in places like Turkey, the traditional madrasa system had fiqh, aqidah, maths, science, logic, rhetoric. All of it was together because it's all knowledge, right? This divorce, right, this divorce that they've made, this divorce is actually quite recent, and Muslims are not going to change it by standing on the outside and pointing fingers. They can change it by being the pioneers of science. Why was the Western world in a position to impose a rule like methodological naturalism? Because, one is colonialism, but also because they were the leaders of science. So if you want to change science, you're not going to change it by pointing fingers and the doors are closed. You're going to change it by getting into power. So my advice to young Muslim students like yourselves, forget doing well in science to get a good job. You should be the pioneers of science. Inshallah, the next penicillin, because at the moment we've overused antibiotics, the next penicillin, it shouldn't be Fleming or whatever, it should be Muhammad. Some Muslim name, or Aisha. Should be a Muslim who discovers the next penicillin. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ told us every disease has a cure. Search for the cure. Right? The non-Muslim, they may say, I think every disease has a cure. I hope every disease has a cure. We don't say I hope or I think. We don't even say I believe. We don't even say I believe every disease has a cure. We say I know every disease has a cure, because that's what the Prophet said. Same thing with Allah. We don't say we believe in Allah, we say we know Allah. Yeah? We're certain of this. So that's what my advice would be about this.
What leads to atheism, and what about the believers who do not practice religion? They believe, but they do not make religion as their part of life. They find it not practical. Like they will offer salat or they will fast, but they will, because they are not seeing the benefit. Like in existence, it's after world we are getting reward, but we are not seeing the benefit we are getting. So what about that?
I can answer the first question, not the second question. So the first question is about why people turn to atheism, and that's my field, that's what I do. Why people turn away from religion. Here in Pakistan you have plenty of scholars and speakers, and this is their country, they understand it really well, so they can give you that answer. I can't. The first part, from my experience of speaking to atheists from the Western world, number one, if you want to follow your desires, the most logical thing in the world is atheism. I'm being honest with you. There is no philosophy that's better to fulfill your material desires than atheism. Nothing. Okay, I want to start a business. I can take interest. If you're an atheist. Muslim, you cannot. Right, I want to have a girlfriend. Atheism, you can. Islam, you cannot. I want to drink. Cannot do that in Islam. You can do it in atheism. From a desire point of view, atheism is the number one philosophy. However, what I point out to the atheists, and I know this from atheists who became Muslim, those things will never make you happy. So that's how I address it. Islam, fine, some desires are not allowed, but it will never give you happiness, right? And there is a direct correlation between atheism, depression, and suicide. And that's not a caricature. There's evidence for this, analytical evidence for this, right? Japan, for example, one of the most atheistic countries with high rates of suicide, high rates of depression. Right? And when I went there, you can physically see on people's faces. Yeah. The other reason why I think some people become atheists is not because of desires, but because the atheist narrative has confused them. And they're genuine people. They're genuine people, but they've become confused. Those people, it's very easy to bring them back using argumentation and reasoning. But the first group, you cannot bring them back because they never entered it. They never entered it because of intellect. They entered it because of emotions. And as Allama Iqbal said, the heart and the mind, the relationship between them, that the mind is the wakil of the heart. The heart decides, right, I want to do zina, right? That's what I want to do. The wakil comes up with an idea. Oh, why don't we turn to atheism? Or why don't we say, oh, in Islam? Oh, the heart says, I don't want to wear hijab, right? And then the wakil says, okay, let me follow Gandhi, right? No, honestly, I'm telling you guys, that's what it is. The heart is the first place. And interestingly, Allah points at the heart as the center of thinking. And even today we've discovered the heart has neurons, right? And the heart, the unconscious mind, it makes decisions before the conscious mind does. There's even evidence from neuroscience in this, right? So we need to work on the hearts. Because atheism is not an intellectual issue. It's more of a fashion statement, it's more of a desire thing, and small percentage of it is people who are genuinely confused. That's been my experience.
What about the believers?
That again, I said, here in Pakistan you have amazing scholars, you have amazing things about why believers turn away. It's different in each country, I think. In Pakistan it'd be different to Turkey, different to UK, different to whatever. But I'm sure ulama in this country have also spoken about why people turn away from, Muslims turn away from religion. Any other questions? Okay, Jazakallah khair for inviting me today. I really enjoyed it. And you were participating and you were helping through the lecture. And inshallah in January, I'm here till August, and every month I'll be coming once to Karachi and I'll be doing programs in different universities. So, because Zuhaib is like my twin, I'm going to make sure I definitely come to Osman Institute of Technology, inshallah, and come every month. And Jazakallah khair for listening.
Jazakallah. Now, with the conclusion of our event in mind, I would like to call Sir Kamran Jamil for a few words.
نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoon to all of you. You must have enjoyed a very thought-provoking session by Subboor. That's something little unusual that we usually listen, but this gives us a lot of thought to think, and that is probably leading towards innovation. Because once we talk about innovation, the creativity, so we need to go into the roots of the knowledge. We need to start from the very basics, and the roots is how we'll be going to innovate and create anything good about the science, about the technology, and so many other things that we are studying. So thank you very much, Subboor sir. I'd like to thank on behalf of myself, our director, Dr. Zahid Sayyed, and especially the Character Building Society, the Ammar, who is leading as president. And lastly, thanks to all the students, faculty, and others who have joined in this session. Thank you very much, Zohair, for being a bridge between me and Subboor sir. We had discussion something 5 days back, and on such a short notice and your short stay in Karachi, although you are coming on a regular basis in the times to come, so we'd like to have another sessions here, inshallah. So thank you very much, Subboor sir, and thank you, Zohair, for making this arrangement. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
I would like to request Dr. Zahir Sayyed to present a memento of thanks to our honorable guest.